She didn't have to be the love interest of Mark. I don't think that was the issue. I think the issue is that she stayed the same as if she was just a blonde-haired white woman in America, which isn't the same thing for some people. Hey guys, for those who don't know me, I'm Ren the Governor, author and illustrator of Hunters of Illumis, my own original manga, and founder and creator of Friday Manga, host of the Friday podcast, where I take you through different topics and ideas that I think about as I go through my own writing journey, and hopefully it'll be something that can help you as you navigate these different thoughts and ideas as well. On this episode, we're going to talk about putting race and different racial ideologies within your stories and how to navigate that and properly place that within the story and discuss it within the story properly as well by looking at different movies, TV shows that I've seen that I've either thought handled it well or didn't handle it that well. I originally wasn't going to discuss this episode at this point in time, but I fell into the conversations going about Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey and his casting, which I thought was interesting because I really didn't pay much attention to the movie. I don't know much about the folklore behind Achilles and all the other characters within that Greek folklore. So when I heard about it and I looked at the casting, I was in a way surprised, most specifically with the casting of Zendaya and Lupita. I love both those actresses, but it definitely caught my eye in terms of what the story was being told, the history of the story that's being told, and how that plays into everything else, from the intention, the casting, and all those kind of things. And using this story as the catalyst into the rest of the conversation, I think one thing that I get when I look at these kind of stories and I think about it as writers and authors or illustrators, whatever we're trying to do to portray a story, I think when we look at, I watched the Troy movie from back in 2004, and it was like, when you think about the location, the history behind the writer and who wrote it and everything like that, they had obviously the people who made these characters had very deep intentions in mind of what these characters look like, what these characters were supposed to be like. And I don't think that necessarily always goes into race or anything like that. But if you have an African folklore story, you would assume that the person who is writing said story about African folklore would have African-based people within the story. So if you place a white character within an African folklore story, whether it was the full intention of the writer or somebody making a rendition, I think that there's an intention that we have to think about. Are we just going to put the character in there and give the aspect of disbelief on the responsibility of the reader or the audience or the watcher, however medium this is being absorbed? Or are we going to create a story that adds to that character, that adds the reason why the character is behind it? So I think in the same way with The Odyssey, how they're casting Zendaya and Lupita, obviously the movie isn't out yet. I think it's coming out at this point, end of the week, Friday, if I'm correct. I haven't really been paying attention to the everything that's been in line with this story, but I think that there is a responsibility when there is such background behind the folklore, the history, and everything. If you're going to make a change like that, make it within the story, because it can honestly be adjusted with very band-aid solutions if you don't really want to put that much effort into it. That is a piece that has to be really processed when you want to take a character, take this background, put a character in Tokyo, put a character in Ghana, Nigeria, put a character in Australia, put a character in America, and you don't apply what's there, what you're navigating. I gave real world locations, even in fantasy locations. I think as we go through other examples that I'm going to show, fantasy locations still, I think, play within racial implications are still important to establish and then use going forward. Thinking about Full Metal Alchemist. Full Metal Alchemist, one of the biggest parts of the story was the Ishvalan War, the story about the Ishvalan War and everything that happened, or the Ishvalan genocide, whatever you want to really look at it as within that. But the Ishvalans were very much characterized by their white hair and their dark skin. Would it make much of an impact if the Ishvalans were just a mix of all the characters we saw on screen? There's so many different casts of characters that are within Full Metal Alchemist. What if Ishval was identified by all of that cast of characters rather than by the very specific characters who we saw throughout that story? I think that would create some question and some uncertainty of the separation between the oppressors and the oppressed, or Scar and his whole connection to his people. If he walked into a tent or went back home and there was a blonde-haired white person who was also an Ishvalan, that wouldn't make as much sense as if you kept it across the board very homogenous, especially in a less advanced society like it was in Full Metal Alchemist, because there were still trains and some low powered cars, very 1930s, 1940s max, I would say, with technology. And that plays into issues of stories like Code Geass, where Code Geass had the separation of the Britannians and the Japanese people that were categorized by a number. I forgot what number they were used. And it was very heavily based in race and the difference of the people, of how they were being treated as opposed to how the people who were of the conquerors, the colonizers, were treating them. But when you kind of look between the cast of characters, everything was so colorful, the characters were so different. There wasn't really anything that landed, I would say, in that story outside of the explicit treatment of those characters. Now, I love Code Geass. I think Code Geass is a great story, but I think that the way they handled the racial aspects for the struggle that was already going on within the story, there was very clearly a rebellion. There was clearly a rebel alliance, which we were able to hitch onto. But without the rebel alliance, if we didn't have those cast of characters, it almost everyone just bled into each other outside of the very exuberant and very well-dressed Britannian leaders, royalty, and this and the third. So that's an example of, not putting in that homogenous appearance for your characters if you're going to make those dividing lines for this is the oppressed, this is the oppressor, this is the one side of the fence, this is the other side of the fence. I think there has to be identifiers or explanations for why there aren't identifiers. And that's really important when going to those battles for the audience, for the immersion, for the ease of understanding, so that people can latch on to one or the other in a very much easier way. With Frieren, you very much have the demons, and then you have Frieren and all the other people. So you know who the demons are, you know what they look like, because the horns and everything about them are very clearly identified. The way they act, the way they speak, there are clear identifiers for them. and then you have the other people, so you know the line. So if you were crazy enough to choose a side on that, you had a side that you knew what to choose. So as you go through different struggles and different issues within societies, making that fence and showing or explaining are the two ways you can help the audience really grasp what's happening. And when they see it, when they recognize patterns or different, like I said, appearances, that's important to help them, so that there isn't too much thinking on that side of it when there's already so much to really dive into with all that. Race doesn't have to just be an importance within battles and societal struggles. It can just simply be within a character's experience. I look at Invincible, how they changed Amber from being a blonde-haired white girl within the comic books to a black girl within the TV show. Now, I think Amber as a whole was a difficult character. I wasn't a huge fan of her, but her issue when it came to her being black was that, and the shift, it obviously her role was to be very expendable, and that goes into a lot of different things about black women being the expendable black girlfriend and all that kind of stuff, or the girlfriend or the black character that doesn't get the love interest and da. When you make that change, something that you can latch on to, especially I think as writers, like I said, this is to really think about and dive into how we can perceive these things and we can think about these things. If you're going to make a change, you're going to make a character from white to black in a very grounded world. They live in America. Amber, Mark, all of them, they live in America. It's another world of America where there's superheroes and other beasts around. But that Amber would still have a very normal experience like other black people would. And it felt like there was a missed opportunity to make her a little more interesting. She didn't have to be the love interest of Mark. I don't think that was the issue. I think the issue is that she stayed the same as if she was just a blonde-haired white woman in America, which isn't the same thing for some people. I feel like when you're writing, and something to think about is, if you're going to shift a character, you're going down the line and you get through your story, like, you know what, maybe I should switch a character to this race, or maybe I should switch the character to this race. What's the implication of that? What's the purpose of it? Is it just to make them look a certain way? Or is there a background you want to add to that character so the character gets a little more depth as they navigate through the story? And Amber could have had a lot of different lines and a lot of different issues as a black woman, dealing with the things she has to deal with in the real life already, and then having to deal with being the boyfriend of a killer alien race. I think that adding some kind of lines, some kind of context would make the black audience, the people who do resonate with that character, connect with even more and may laugh or even have such a positive response, because it's like, yo, I would have done that too, or yo, I would have said that, because it just gives a little more depth to the character. And I think that's so important, to get the audience connected, to get the audience involved, and have a lot more fun with and enjoyable with these characters, and not just feeling like all the dialogue is to just push the narrative forward. Because if you just have characters who are speaking in a way like unrealistically, and you're like, oh, I'm just waiting for this character to give me exposition, or this character to give me some kind of reaction that would more than likely be something that helps the main character move forward, then the side characters just kind of become fodder for whatever nonsense happens within the story, rather than being actual characters that make you feel like you're involved in everything that's going on there. One story that I think did it pretty well in terms of creating racial implications within the story was the Harry Potter series. Me and my wife recently just got into Harry Potter. I've been on a fantasy kick, so I've been diving into different fantasy stories. If you have any fantasy stories, leave some in the comments below so I can dive into them and really get more, because my story is very based in fantasy. So I'm trying to understand and get a little more into it, because I never really grew up on fantasy as much as I am into it right now. Harry Potter, a very big thing, was about the people who were born with magic, the people who were born wizards, the people who were not. That was kind of Voldemort's whole deal. It was something that was a big part of the Chamber of Secrets, that within that, and the Basilisk, and how a lot of people who were half Muggle, half wizard were getting petrified and everything. So when you watch something like that, you understand the struggle that's happening. Sure, there's plenty of other things to get into with all of that within the Harry Potter series, but the struggle between Muggles and wizards were very clear, whether it was within the Weasleys and how they navigated with Muggles. Ron Weasley's dad, how he was very interested in Muggles, and how, I can't remember the blonde dude's name right now, but his father was very much against Ron Weasley's father, because of how he was so interested in the Muggles and the Muggles items and things like that. So, and there was a lot of systems that played within how the wizards acted and worked around Muggles, people who didn't have magic. So it was very intricate in what they did and how they did things, which is what caused a lot of Harry's grief when he learned that he was a wizard, what he couldn't do when he was back with the Dursleys. It was just so involved. That was that difference of peoples, which is not exactly a race thing in this sense, but it still plays that dividing line that says, you're this, you're that, we don't like you for this, and we don't like you for that, and or we can't show you this because of this, and we can't show you this because of that. It plays such an intricate role in the story that makes that part of it feel more alive throughout the series, because it's crucial to create those dividing lines that let you know the difference isn't just something to make the story kind of move in different areas or cause someone to have a dialogue about racism and then like put your little stand on the soapbox moment. It's just something that's there that everyone has to navigate. And how is that going to play as more characters get involved? Coincidentally, talking about Harry Potter, with the new series coming up and Snape being now a dark-skinned black man, I don't think that necessarily changes up fully who Snape is. I know a lot of people have issues with the change because Snape was described in a certain way, but I do think that as writers, when we make those decisions, or when directors make those casting decisions, we can say, oh, it's just fiction, or oh, it's just a character. We can change however, but now we have to say, what is this going to now do to the story? And is that something that we want to dive into deeper? Or we're just going to kind of like brush it under the rug and just kind of let it be the same kind of character, or let the character be the same because we made this change? I think every change should be intentional. Every change should be processed and thought of and navigated. And that's why I think when we make racial changes, racial implications, placing race within stories, it has to create the dividing line for the sake of immersion, for the sake of understanding, and for the sake of getting people to cling to things. Even when we go to historical or timepiece like stories, Enola Holmes. I love the Enola Holmes series. I watched 1 and 2 with my wife. We both enjoyed those movies. I thought it was fun. I thought it was interesting, an interesting take on Sherlock and the world that is. But there was a scene where Enola Holmes, I think in the second one, she was going to a ball of sorts or a party. And this is in obviously old England. We're talking horse carriages, all this kind of stuff. And the guests were there, you're watching around, you see all the guests, and I see black women also a part of the guests that are there, fully dressed, really nice. For me, as someone who is black watching this, knowing that even in Europe, racism was a very big issue, it kind of, I understand that people want to just be like, oh, we're taking a more modern take, or oh, this isn't really England, so we don't have to really navigate it the same way. But I still think that there's a break of immersion. Going back to that point, like I said, it brings immersion, those dividing lines, understanding the dividing lines. It can break immersion for your watchers, for your readers, for the people who are absorbing this content, if you just allow the way you see the world to, or the way you want to see the world, be within a timepiece that it wouldn't fit then. Because now we're losing that ability to navigate that a little more, ability to lose that depth. Same thing from changing characters, changing things in that would be that would be in history, but isn't because you're not there. Now you lost a piece of depth. You change character within a story, and you don't navigate. You just keep these things the same as you perceive it. Now you lost a piece of depth. I think all of it goes down to depth and what's in there. I know people don't want to get the soapbox conversations and all the time, or having these dialogues about race and racism and all those kind of things. I don't think that has to be in stories. I think people who often put those kind of things in stories generally just wanted to put an idea in there, but didn't know how to put it within the story itself. I'm talking about placing within the story so that it is something that adds to the fullness of your story. And I think we have to, at all times, think about race. You can't have elves a part of the orcs and not explain why that's the case. You can't have goblins marrying succubus and not explain why that's the case. You can make your fantasy world do anything, but why is all of that happening if there are black people in the higher parties in a deep south, American deep south in the 1800s setting? Why are those black people there? Why are they able to be at that party? If you just let that slide, it takes away all of the different implications and ruins a lot of the immersion of it in the first place. I think we just have to really consider those examples, the examples that I brought up, and be like, how much more further do I want to take this character? How much more do I want to take this society? How much deeper do I want to take this moment that's within my story? Even if your story is not about race, there can be just little moments that show, oh, there's more to this world that this person created that I don't know, and they chose not to step on it, but there's room for them to if they ever want to make something secondary, a spin-off, or anything like that. And that's kind of how I navigate as I go through my story. A really big thing about my story is the people who have the power of light and the people who do not. The people who do not are often non-humans. The people who do often have the power of light are humans. So that creates a double level of where the line is, because now people who aren't human can be over the other side of the line, but are they still going to be treated the same within that line, within that side of the line? And humans can be on the other side of the line when they don't have powers, but maybe they're treated a little better than even the non-humans who are on the other side of the line. So I tried to look into that and be like, okay, if this character is this and they're in this space, what does that mean? And that's really just taking the setting that you've already established or that you're taking influence from and putting that all into one full story. So I just think race is so crucial to establish, to talk about, whether it's fantasy or fiction. I don't think we should take the approach that, oh, it's just a fictional story, these creators don't have to give their reasoning. I think we should do our best to give reasoning for every decision we make in everything we do, especially with racial context, because it adds so much. And it's not just about being woke or being political about it. It's just, how rich do you want your world to be? So, how do you implement race in your stories? How do you implement the racial issues, the racial tensions? Comment below and let me know what you'd think about as you navigate through this part of your writing in your stories, your fantasy world, or your historical worlds. If you're interested to see more of my journey as I go through creating Hunters of Illumis, working on volume 1, I'm working on volume 2 right now. The volume will be done by sometime the end of next year. You can follow me on Instagram or any other social you may. Just type in Ren the Governor. You will find me there. And if you want to get ahead and buy the first volume of Hunters of Illumis, go to www.fridayManga.com or hit the link in the description below. Well, so glad you came. Hope to see you in the next episode. See y'all.